cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure.
We wanted people that were insanely great at what they did.
Nobody was making any money at all. Most people thought the internet was going to be a fad.
All right. Today on the podcast, I have someone entering the Third Timer Club, which is very exciting. It's an exclusive company. I have Rob Sobers. He was on, he probably doesn't remember this, back on episode 16. He wrote a blog post a long time ago. I wish he would blog a lot more, to be honest, about this idea of how to pick a startup on easy mode and why you shouldn't do a B2C startup and you should do a B2B startup or company. And that blog post has proven to be very, very true. Because we're going to talk about how he's been a part of a company for 10 years to go from startup to now a publicly traded company that has a market cap over $2 billion. And he's the CMO of this company, which blows my mind. But Rob, glad to have you back, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. Always have fun chatting with you and talking shop.
Yeah. And so, Rob, I was working at a startup, and there's two other podcasts that he was on that I'll put into the show notes, where he's been super helpful in my career. And I'm always envious of your background because you started very technical as a developer and then shift to kind of marketing and distribution. And I think that gives you a little bit of an unfair advantage, especially when you're doing, online-based marketing or even enterprise sales where it's involved in that. So I love hearing your perspective because I think it can be unique to others that don't have that technical background. Do you still feel like that's relevant today, or are you like, oh, that was so long ago, it doesn't matter? As a CMO, it's totally different?
No, I still definitely tap into that history as a developer, and I've remained technical and hands-on in various ways, even as I've kind of climbed the ranks into executive roles. I still know how to get my hands dirty with some CSS, tweak a web page, landing page here or there, link up, an API between, HubSpot and Salesforce. And I feel like I still use a lot of my technical chops day in and day out. And then in a sales context, because Varonis is a cybersecurity company, when I'm in a room with a CISO, a chief information security officer of a big company that we're trying to close, I'm the marketing guy in the room, but I usually, can pull the card and say, hey, look, like I've worked in security before. I've done reverse engineering. Like I know I can talk shop with you too. Right. And that gives me a little bit of credibility in the room. So I find myself using it all the time. And there's like a lot of developer centric startups now, thinking about like Twilio and, I know they acquired Segment, but Segment comes to mind, DigitalOcean. There's so many startups and scale ups that are technically focused, and it just helps to have people who can relate to the audience. I always envy like CMOs of companies who sell to sales and marketers, because you kind of have like default credibility. It's like if you're trying to sell to a CMO and you're a CMO, it's so easy comparatively.
Right. Yeah. If you're like the CMO of HubSpot, it's like that's you're marketing to yourself essentially. Well, cool. So what we're going to get into is, you have seen a company. So we were talking ahead of time, and we thought it'd be fun to talk about growth at different levels, because you've seen this company in the early days. You've seen it hit 50 million in sales. You've seen it hit 100 million. I was looking through your guys' P&L. I believe you guys are at approaching or even over 500 million in sales. Is it kind of in and around that ballpark?
Yeah, I think we're around 450 million in ARR is what we reported last quarter. I'd have to look back exactly to see what our Q3 earnings were, but yeah, right around that range.
Dude, that's insane. So we're going to break down these different levels of growth from your perspective, and what it takes to get to these different levels, and what you had to change, what you had to start doing, and even what you had to stop doing. And I was also thinking through it. What I'd love to know is, what are some of the factors that go into it, whether it's like channel mix, like what you do that's scalable, that's not scalable. Because one thing that I thought was interesting, Nathan Barry, CEO of ConvertKit, they do 30 million in sales. I see him DMing people on Twitter to switch over to ConvertKit. He did that to me. He's like, hey man, I see you're still using whatever, like you should like go over to ConvertKit. And I responded, I go, first off, I think it's awesome that you're directly like emailing people, but I'm like, aren't you the CEO? Aren't you too busy for that? I'm interested to see how you think through scalable versus non-scalable tactics. I want to talk about paid versus non-paid, and you kind of talk about like your enterprise sales model. And then also, I even want to get into you as a professional. There's this idea of a T-shaped marketer where it's like, you know, a little bit of everything, but you can go deep on a few things. How have you had to evolve from generalist to specialist? So like it's obviously working where you're now an executive, because I think a lot of people look at that. So I know that's a lot I just threw at you, but let's start with the early days. If you can go back, even like when did you enter Varonis? How big was it revenue wise?
I think we're between 20 and 30 million in revenue. So pretty much escape velocity, like found product market fit, though the company and the technology is completely different today than it was back then. But yeah, we had sales reps. We had a kind of a repeatable sales process in place already, but not a ton of marketing. It was very much like hand-to-hand combat, like sales reps kind of picking up the phone, you know, doing the dirty work. It was very sales-led, and we still are a very sales-led organization, but we have a much healthier mix right now.
Yeah.
So when I joined, we didn't have much of a marketing playbook. We did some events here and there. You know, we had a website. We were just starting a blog. We didn't really have a content marketing strategy. So very nascent marketing org when I joined. It was basically like 1 or 2 people.
So that's interesting. I hear like, I forget, there was one founder I heard on like My First Million where it's a very sales-based organization where it's almost like sales-led growth. Whatever they can sell, they'll make a product for, and they're phenomenal at building a sales team and scaling it and growing that. But then you have the counter to that. It's like Keith Raboy, you know, PayPal Mafia, like Open Store, Open Door, all that stuff. He hates sales. He wants it to be like product-led growth and that initiative. So it sounds like you came in and it was more sales first. And did you get to that next level of growth with marketing, or was it all about focusing on sales and making it be much more optimized and streamlined?
We had a pretty healthy mix when I joined, and you know, post when I joined and we evolved from 20 to 100. You know, if you think about like the go-to-market, like the big levers, right? You have outbound sales, be it BDRs or AE direct outbound. You've got your channel partners, which is a big component for pretty much any cybersecurity vendor, MarTech vendor. You've got usually a good channel. Like for MarTech vendors,
can you explain that for people that don't know? What does that mean, channel partner?
Yeah. So, you know, when you think about it, and when I first describe it, you're going to be like, is this really how things work still in 2023? But channel partner, the idea is that you have somebody who distributes your software on your behalf. So I don't know, pick a random big company in the world, Bank of America. Their IT department, their CIO, their CISO typically buys their technology from a partner, a distributor, who might consult them on what is the best data security product, what, you know, endpoint protection should I use, what SIM should I use. So basically, you've almost got this like middle layer that resells technology from vendors like Varonis or CrowdStrike or, you know, SentinelOne. And in the marketing world, it might be, you know, HubSpot. They have probably thousands of resellers that are marketing agencies like yours that advise clients. They maybe do like agency services for their clients, but also consult on technology stack. And they say, you know what, you know, given our strategy here, we could really use HubSpot. Oh, and by the way, we should also be using, I don't know, 6 Sense or something like that. And then that agency will then resell 6 Sense and HubSpot to that end client, take a percentage, and you know, that's how it kind of works. So at Varonis, we're 100% channel driven, as are many cybersecurity software vendors. So you basically don't buy it directly from the vendor.
Mm-hmm. God, okay, that's super interesting. And on the sales side, like what made the sales team good to even get to 25 or 50 million in sales? Was the founder, was he very focused on sales, or was there a hired gun that like really was a been there, done that was able to get the right systems in place?
Yeah, we were lucky to have, our CEO is very sales savvy. He's very good at sales, a great salesperson himself, but he's a technologist too. Like, he founded the company with his co-founders, and they wrote the first code. But he did hire a sales and sales engineering leader who had done it before, and they were great. And Jim, our global head of sales, is still with the company today.
Wow.
So we have a lot. We're lucky. We have a lot of the sort of founding team on both the R&D side and leaders on the sales side that have been here since the very early days. Many of our VPs of sales, we're the ones that were the very first sales reps at the company, knocking on doors and selling the first, closing the first few deals, and then building on that methodology and figuring out, well, how do we actually scale this to hundreds of sales reps right around the globe in different markets and different geos, which is a whole nother challenge. Once you sort of break, out of a certain revenue band, you start to have to think about your EMEA expansion, and EMEA is not homogenous, right? You've got UK and Ireland, you've got France, you've got Germany. These are different markets with different cultures and different languages. And so it starts to get complex really, really fast. And so, Dave Kellogg, who's a great marketer, he's an ex-CMO, CEO. He's really done it all. He does a lot of great talks for SaaStr. He's got this sort of framework that he uses. It's like there's figure it outers and then scale it uppers, right? So like you've got the people who are really good between like 0 and 20 million, right? They love figuring out product market fit. They love, I think he says like, just give me like a phone and a machete and I will I will figure it out. I'll figure out how to get us our first 10 big customers. Those types of people typically are not scale it uppers, where scale it uppers are very good at like, give me my playbook and I will run it for you. And I will hire people and I will indoctrinate them in the playbook, and we will put X amount in and we'll get Y amount out, and good at keeping people accountable to the systems and measuring things. And, so, that's kind of, you have to ask yourself, like, what do I enjoy doing? Who am I? Am I a figure it outer or a scale it upper? And that kind of determines like where you'll thrive. Do you want to join a company that's in the $300+ million band where it's all about scaling up? Or do you want to join a $2 million startup, or ConvertKit at 30 million? Even ConvertKit, I'm betting they're more in scale up mode. And Nathan's so savvy that I think like, he's probably good at both. He definitely has cracked the code on the figure it out side. And now it seems like he's doing really well with scaling it up too.
Man, okay. David Kellogg, is that what you said? Who did that post?
Yeah, Dave Kellogg. He's got a blog called Kellblog, and kellblog.com, and he's just a fantastic thinker and speaker. It seems like blogs are coming back in 2023. I don't know if that's because of the whole Twitter turmoil or whatever. But people are blogging a lot more, and so I have like my handful of blogs that I just like always check every morning. Whether it be like Kellogg's blog or avc.com, Fred Wilson's blog. So
I miss my RSS feed. Those were the good old days. Well, so what are you? Are you a figure it outer or a scale it upper?
I was thinking about this and I'm like, what am I? And I love figuring it out, but I've been in scale it up mode for so long that I think I'm a little bit more of a scale it upper now. But part of me, like part of my heart, loves to figure it out phase. I really do. Like product market fit, initial messaging, key differentiators, how to get that first couple of customers. What's the first marketing channel that's really going to work for us? Like I loved figuring that out at Varonis. But I also have really, and I think I'm still growing in this area, but really have taken to systems and sort of like, how do we do annual budgeting and like make sure that we're like on plan and on target and building pipeline. So, I'm not exactly sure.
Man, well, I think you and even like Nathan, you've clearly shown you can flex to both, right? Because I think of you as like a tinkerer, like you've built SaaS apps yourself, but you've clearly shown like you can do the scale it upper. What does it take to be that scaler upper? Because I'm looking at this, I'm like, I'm definitely a figure it outer. Where's my plateau as far as scaling it up? Because I actually think what's holding some like one day design and growth hit back is it's almost a badge of honor. I'm like, oh, we don't need sales. We're growing without it. But imagine if we did that really well. What if I got into scale it up mode there? And so what did you have to learn to go to scale mode?
Yeah. So not, not being comfortable with lucking into your number is something like I'm generally a paranoid person when it comes to like achieving goals. Like I like a plan, when I have to work with people who I'm like, hey, tell me what your plan is for the quarter. And they're like, I'll do a little bit of this. Maybe we'll do a little bit of that. I'm like, wait a minute. We're like 3 days into the quarter. Like, where's your model? Like how many meetings, how many, opportunities are we generating this quarter? Like, what are the big events that you're running? I like to see a plan. I am uncomfortable with uncertainty and sort of like, we'll figure it out mid-quarter. And so I think people that are really good at either building systems or taking existing systems and deploying them and getting your leadership team to buy in, and then being able to sort of communicate it all the way across the company and then down to each individual contributor and getting them to buy in and feel inspired. I feel like those are the key attributes of a good scale it upper. Making a plan in a silo, and trying to attack it without sharing it with the rest of the executive team is like a death knell for marketing leaders. And I've seen it happen many, many times. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is being able to communicate and get organizational buy-in behind your decisions.
So building a real tactical bottoms up plan that shows like, if we do these inputs, the result will follow. It's socializing that to get buy-in, to get budget from everybody else. But then this third component, it's like, can you like rally the team to like delegate and elevate and leverage? What are some things people can do to get those skills? Because I love making a good model, but I will say like I can get caught in the whirlwind and I'll make the model and then I'll be like, oh crap, remember that thing I made 3-4 weeks ago? Are we on track? Because I haven't looked. Like what can people do to be good at that? Because I feel like if that is a skill you get, you become very valuable at a company.
Yeah. I think to simplify it, like you have to decide, what are your company goals, right? Independent of marketing, like what is the company trying to do this year? And you talk to your CEO about it, you talk to your head of sales about it, and you sort of figure out like where you're trying to go. Like for Varonis, it's well known that we're on a path to $1 billion in ARR, right? And so what do we need to achieve this year? How many new customers do we need to add? Just simple milestones that are applicable to everyone in the company. Like a sales rep's going to care about that revenue goal. A marketer is going to care about that revenue goal. The customer success leader is going to care about our revenue goal. So what are you trying to hit? And then when it comes to, okay, well, what's marketing's contribution? And then like, how are we going to do marketing? That's where people typically break down and they go into their corner, and either they don't make a plan and they just said, we're going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or they make a plan and keep it to themselves. After you've agreed on the company goals, you have to get agreement across the org about how you do marketing. Because if your CEO and your head of sales are like, we believe that, the best type of marketing for our business is to do events. And you're like, I'm going to go all digital. Now you're going to be completely at odds with each other throughout the whole year. And when you miss one of your numbers, the head of sales is going to point at the head of marketing and say, well, it's because we decided to do all this LinkedIn stuff when I said we should do golf events, right? So sort of putting your plan down on paper, in a slide deck that you share with the executive leadership team, and you say, hey guys, we all agreed that we're looking to add X number of new customers. I believe the best way to get there from a marketing perspective is to do this mix of events, this mix of digital. These are the core campaigns and themes that we're going to focus on. Everybody good? Yeah, we're good. We agree with your philosophy. And now all the different tactics and how much you spend on LinkedIn versus you spend on events, like that's for you to figure out. You don't have to bog people down with that. But I think getting alignment on that sort of general, like we all know that the mission is to climb to the top of the mountain, but do we take the north side of the mountain or the back or the south side? Like you have to get agreement there. And then rallying the troops to make them feel like if they're not into mountain climbing, you've got the wrong team, right? Like, or if everyone's like, a lot of times with marketers, I find that don't love structure and they're the creative marketers. And you say, we're going to build a model and now we need you to do an OKR and you need to like populate it in the spreadsheet. Your eyes are rolling like, when do we get to actually do fun stuff? I want to market. I want to write copy. But those types of people, they're not really fit for leadership positions, I found. because especially in scale up mode where you have to be metric driven and you have to be obsessed with your pipeline and looking at it every single week. It's that kind of rigor that makes scaling work.
So really, like, holding true to those financial goals, how you're quantifying, looking at week in, week out, and then creating that plan. One thing you talked about is mix, because it's something that we're thinking through this year. It's like, what's the mix of, okay, like last year we spent $60K on ads. And so I'm looking at this year, I'm like, okay, what do we spend this year on ads? And we have a goal of, we want to do offline marketing events and stunts. Like, how do you plan that out? Because one thing when we talk with our startups and clients, we have this idea of making noise. How many times in a year are you making noise? Because you have your always on growth tactics of SEO and ads, but then you have these marketing moments and events that could be partnerships, product launches. You try and ride a cultural movement or whatever that is. You could pick a fight with an incumbent, do some huge like conference like HubSpot does. How are you balancing that and planning that out through the year that people could learn from? And sorry, I'll make it even harder. How has that changed from when you're like 50 million to like approaching $1 billion?
Yeah, I think it becomes a little bit easier as you scale because you have more budget to work with, more people to work with. So you can do more, and doing more isn't always the answer, right? Like you have to make sure, and this is something that's one of the hardest things, is making sure you're always working on the right things. As your pool of resources grow, if you deploy them the way you deployed them, last year, it may not be right. So I'm maniacally always thinking about, like, for each leader on my team, are we working on the right things? I don't want to run 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction, hit a wall. But yeah, looking at like sort of key industry events, you talked about like stunts and these marketable moments where, when there might be a key industry event happening in a city, and maybe you concentrate more of your ad dollars around that, right? Because there's going to be a bunch of people in town. So maybe you buy some out of home advertising that month, at the airport when everyone's flying in for, I don't know, Dreamforce or something like that, depending on what your target audience is. Now, things are going to be more expensive because a lot of other vendors are going to have that same idea, right? So you kind of have to think through the trade-offs, the opportunity costs. But I love the idea of these sort of like stunts and like little marketing like moments that put your brand on the map in new and clever ways, because everyone's going to be buying LinkedIn ads. Right. Everyone's going to have that trade show booth. You have to constantly force yourself. And one way marketers do this is like you take, I don't know, 10%, 15% of your budget, and you literally like just put it aside into a separate bucket called experiments, and no one can touch it unless they have like sort of a radical idea that, that's different.
Is that something that you're doing this year? Because the thing that people need to realize, you're not like some privately held company that can keep their financials to themselves. People are looking at your stock price on an hourly, minute by minute basis. You have to report what you're doing every quarter. How do you balance like hitting the numbers each quarter with, hey, I want to do something innovative and new. I want to be able to take 10% of our budget, and we might light it on fire, or we could create this marketing moment that builds up brand equity that changes the game. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's really about the risk appetite of the CMO, right? Like CMOs don't last very long at companies. So, you could play it safe, which could also be risky, right? Like a lot of times the money that you light on fire is lit on fire through traditional and quote unquote safe tactics, right? Like you could do a trade show and it could feel safe because like, hey, there's like 25, 50 other vendors there also, like, hey, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. But it could yield a zero ROI, and you could have blown 25K or 50K, depending on how, big you go. So the way you have to look at it, I think, is like opportunity cost. Like, could we skip a trade show and not be there and take that money and put it towards something that is a little bit more unique, more experimental, maybe start up a channel that we haven't used before. So it really is all about risk appetite. And like, that's the thing, is like, nobody knows the correct marketing mix. And like, if CMO tells you like, I'm 100% confident in my marketing mix, or I have the right formula, they're lying, and that's kind of the cool thing about marketing is like, I love being able to say, I don't know the answer, but when I look at my plan, do I feel good about it? Like, do I feel good about that I have a good amount of kind of crazy stuff, some surprise and delight, some safe stuff that I know worked last year and may or may not work as well this year. So, but as a public company CMO, I think you do have to have a certain amount of things that will deliver with reasonable predictability. Predictable revenue is like the name of the game. And for our model, we're not product led, we're not focused on commercial and small businesses. We're enterprise software company. So the universe of people that we sell to is smaller than the population. We're not Red Bull, right? So like where anybody could potentially be a consumer of our product. So we can circle those companies that we want to know about us, to like us, to trust us. And so we could be a little bit more targeted in that way too. And that yields more predictability, I think, than, a consumer brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are where's your mind going as you're like thinking of 2023 and where you want to test things and where you want to do things differently? And even just like plan an idea with you, like there's this idea, I'm getting this guy on the podcast, Will Hughes. He came with this framework called Liquid Mind. And he does this exercise with executives and CEOs, and we're about to go through it. And it's all about, to do things differently, you need to think differently. And to think differently, you need to change like your framework for thinking. And he has a few different ways to do it. One is, what are people overvaluing and what are people undervaluing? Like obviously Moneyball is a great example. People are overvaluing the 6'2" slugger that could hit home runs. They're undervaluing the guy with the belly but can always like get a single and get on base. And he did this with direct consumer brands where he'd look at their financials to see what they're overvaluing and undervaluing. And what they overvaluing was agencies and overspending on them, but they're undervaluing amazing copywriting. And like, what if instead of like paying this agency this amount, you got the best copywriter and you just like had them focus on like knocking it out of the park? And like example is Geico, like what they did with their copywriting. And so he has these different frameworks for how you look at what's overvalued, undervalued, and different ways to approach it from different perspectives. So is that something you're trying to do each quarter or year on how you can think differently and zig where others are zagging?
Yeah, we're always thinking about that. And, it's important to have the right measures in place, right? Like for us, the biggest leading indicator to pipeline is how many meetings we're able to drive for our salespeople, right? And think about it, like our salespeople can book meetings in a few different ways. Like a partner can introduce them and say, hey, like, this company might be a good fit for Varonis. Like I've set up this meeting, and obviously they're incentivized to do it because they make margin on the sale. Mm-hmm. Or the sales rep's going to do outbound and, do account mapping, find out who the right people are on Zoom Info or LinkedIn and, make cold calls or, do your traditional outbound playbook. Mm-hmm. And then you've got your inbound. And I feel like, when we look at these leading indicators, like we're looking at it by channel, we're looking at it by specific campaign, we'll look at it by landing page, and then sort of like find the key things that are lighting up for us, and then reallocate budget, move things around, reprioritize efforts based on that. So I think, that's the key. Like try new things, have the right measures in place to see whether they're moving that leading indicator up, and then reinvest and double down on those things.
Yeah.
It's hard to know like what those things are going to be each quarter, right? Because they do change quite like more frequently than you would imagine.
Yeah, I know. And I think you and I both follow like refined labs with the idea of like demand creation rather than demand capture, or demand creation rather than demand capture. And so like, what are the things you're doing to try and pull that off? It's something that we're trying to do this year. So
yeah, I mean, on that front, like I think a simpler way to think about those two things, because people can get caught up in the semantics of like, wait, what is demand capture versus demand generation, or demand creation? Like the easier way to think about it, I think, is like, why buy at all, and then why buy mine, right? Like, so someone who's already shopping, demand that you're trying to capture is like someone's already looking to buy a car, right? And now it's like, why do I buy a Mercedes versus a Kia, right? And now like I have to find that shopper as they're going from dealership to dealership and say, this is why you should buy mine, right?
Mhm.
That's capturing someone who's already looking.
Mhm.
And then advertising or doing some sort of marketing that says like, why should I even buy one at all? Like that's demand creation. Because sometimes like there's cybersecurity professionals out there that have no idea that they need something like Varonis, right?
Yeah.
But if I do marketing in the right way, and I can sort of like bubble the problems that we solve up in their head, and they're like, oh yeah, actually, you know what? We are struggling with this. I just didn't know how to articulate it, so I wasn't shopping. Or maybe I'm not the person who buys technology, but I keep seeing this content and I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm going to tell my boss about this. This looks like something that, that we could use. So that's kind of the demand creation. And I think that's like Refine Labs philosophy is don't sit back and wait for people to know that they need your thing. Go out and evangelize a little bit more. And then more people will start having the idea that they need your thing. And then you'll create more shoppers from nothing,
I like how you simplified that more. Man, you're dropping all these new kind of phrases I'm going to be stealing from you. I'm still like on cloud nine with the figure it out or with the scale it uppers. I can't believe I haven't heard that one yet.
That's a Dave Kellogism. He can't take credit for that one.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. So all right, from 50 million to approaching 500 million in sales, I want to know like what were the big unlocks or the things that changed that helped you go up that curve? If you can talk about, we hit plateaus and then we had to do this or that, or this is when I got really sophisticated with ABM or with data, or, this is when I had to like become a true manager and stop like being a builder. Like what are some of the big takeaways from going up that insane growth curve?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is like I haven't stopped being a hands-on builder still. Our marketing team is still pretty small for the size company we are. We're around 40 people, which I think if you look at a lot of $100 million, even $50 million companies, software companies, you'll find, 50, 60, 75, 100 people teams. So we're pretty nimble still and small. Profitability is the name of the game. But yeah, over the years, there was a couple inflection points I could think of. Number one was when our content engine kicked in. One of the first projects that I worked on at Varonis was building the blog and just sort of building a cadence of writing and, building a solid foundation of traffic to our website. And we got really good at doing that. We hired a content marketer.
Sorry, what type of blog content? Is this SEO focused content, or is it like opinion, thought leadership content, or is it a little bit of both?
We've gone through so many different waves. Like in the beginning, it was technical content. So like I would be learning, I was a new marketer at Varonis. I'd be learning about the product. And as I was learning, I was just blogging about what I was learning, which I highly recommend. Like this is one of the best tips I can give any marketer is like, as you're learning stuff, either about your product or just learning about marketing, go blog about it, go write about it, take good notes and then turn it into content. I think, Nathan Barry is like you mentioned him before. He's been the best at this. Like he documents his journey at ConvertKit. He'll write on his blog how, he adopted a sales methodology and it exploded his business, or he'll talk about how he manages his team, his remote team. Write about the stuff you're working on. So that's what I was doing. I was kind of writing about, the product. And as I was learning what made Varonis different, and I was able to articulate it in a meeting with a customer, with a prospect, I was like, okay, I'm getting it now. And so then I wrote a blog post, what makes Varonis different, or why you need, an audit trail for your data, to see who's accessing data at what time. And I would just, write about this stuff. I would take screenshots. I would make like really solid, like product marketing content. And then some of it would start ranking. And then I started learning more about SEO and I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, even though we don't have a feature on this topic, I'll write something on this topic because it seems to be popular. And so then I would write more of an SEO focused article. And then we hired a firm called Siege Media, professional sort of SEO and content marketing agency. And they put like a real framework around what we were doing. And that's when we saw our traffic explode is, because I would do it whenever I had time and we had one content marketer. And so we were like slowly and steadily building a nice foundation of organic traffic. And then Siege Media came in and said, no, we have like a real framework for this. And we're going to make sure we publish X amount of pieces per month. We're going to do the research before we decide what topics to pick. And we went on a mission, and our traffic and domain authority and everything started going up and up and up. And now, we have really strong blog traffic. And then the next problem became, how do we convert that traffic into, top of funnel leads? And I know everyone like craps on MQLs, but like, I think MQL is like, it's all about how you define it. Like we define MQL as somebody who has decided that they want to speak to sales about potentially trying our product.
And MQL is marketing qualified lead for people that are wondering what that acronym is. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like, in the world of like a product-led growth company where you think about like Zapier or whatever, if I want to try Zapier today or MailChimp or something like that, I can go and sign up, right? And when they see that notification that we got a new trial today, their marketing team celebrates because that's somebody who's now going to start using the product. And then maybe at the end of that 30-day trial, they'll put their credit card in. Just now think about it in an enterprise model. I get someone on the website and now they're interested. And so they request a demo with sales, or they request pricing, or they say, I want a free trial of Varonis, but you can't actually start a trial by yourself. That's a signal to me that they want to have a meeting with the sales team and figure out how to get started. That's my MQL definition. And if I'm moving that number up, some percentage of those people are going to try Varonis and then some percentage are going to buy it. So to me, that's a good metric as any to tell me if I'm doing my job right. They want to speak to our sales team, turning casual blog visitors into those people who want to try your product, that's a big science project by itself, right? You're not going to be able to convert everybody. Maybe you can convert some people from a blog visitor to downloading a piece of content that doesn't yet indicate that they want to try your product, but indicates that they have a problem that you solve. So like, that was kind of another evolution in our growth, is turning visitors into buyers, and getting better and better at that and driving those conversion rates up.
No, that's so like the company starts, it's a sales led business for the most part that gets to like 25, 50 million. Then another unlock is getting the blog going, getting organic traffic, SEO driven content. It's worth calling out. You were doing it yourself, getting your hands dirty, and then you got an agency, which probably allowed you to manage them and stay on top of them even more. Even though, we've had Ross, you actually introduced me to the guys at Siege Media. It's super impressive. So that's one big unlock. And then it's okay, we're starting to get these MQLs. How do we really optimize that funnel or flow to push them down, potentially the sales process, to have like good sales velocity? What kind of comes after that? Where are we at now? Are we at like the $100 million mark? Are we at 250 million? How far is that taking us?
Yeah. I mean, that's still evolving today, but like, that was a good unlock to help us accelerate, from that like 30 to 100. And then, I don't want to simplify it because it's not like these things happen serially, right? Like where, in this band, we're focused on content marketing. It's like, okay, achievement unlocked. And now let's focus on product marketing. And now achievement unlocked, let's do events. And so a lot of this stuff happens in parallel, but I can tell you, like, there's certain things you're going to have to get good at when you get bigger, especially in an enterprise sales company. And one of them is sales enablement and product marketing, which are kind of like sister organizations, right? So, it's one thing, you release a cool new feature, right? You do a webinar, right? Your demand gen people are working on your webinar. You can make some ads, et cetera. But one of your biggest weapons is going to be your sales force, right? Whether it's, account executives selling more products to existing customers and meeting with existing, champions during QBRs, quarterly business reviews, or meeting with new prospects. Like, they are a mouthpiece for you. And if they don't have the same message that's on your website, right? Like if you're telling two different stories, then you're getting way out of sync, and you have to really teach them how to do an effective demo, because as you're getting those meetings to come in through the blog or through events or through whatever channels you're using, if your sales reps aren't properly trained on how to tell the story, how to demo the product, then you could fall short. And that's a joint job, I believe, between sales enablement and product marketing.
Gotcha. So getting very cohesive there, because that's just going to make it more efficient. All the traffic you're getting from organic, wherever else, and make sure you close them the right way, and they're not just falling through the cracks.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff that goes into that. There's sales methodology. Are your sales reps good listeners? Do they have an effective sales methodology playbook? Are they maniacal about follow-up so that you have one meeting and then they're like wishy-washy about whether we want to continue? Do they have a process to actually follow up on those leads? So there's like a lot that goes into it beyond what marketing contributes, but we do contribute a lot, right? Like we own usually the presentation that's being shown during that first meeting, right? We own a lot of the follow-up collateral that we'll send to our champion to convince their boss whether they want to buy Varonis or not. The ROI calculation. So a lot of software companies have what they call value engineering teams, and they just help sales reps articulate to new prospects the value of buying the product, right? And you have these people working on ROI calculations and filling out RFPs. And so the machine gets more complicated. I mean, we haven't really even talked about dealing with finance and legal, right? Like as you get bigger, marketing has to interface with a lot more teams and a lot more red tape and process to make sure you're doing things right.
Yeah. And talk to me about, like, as you're growing, like, how are you managing your time so you're always having impact? Because as you become publicly traded, as you're now an executive, like, how are you still able to be like, okay, I have my deep work time to think of those innovative ideas, to like manage those up and comers, to like really have an impact on the business? Like, what does your week look like to where you can still like run the company the way you want?
Yeah. So, I mean, it changes a lot depending on, changes in the team structure. So right now, like, we have a vacancy on like the operation side. So I find myself doing a lot more with our CFO, managing, our budgets and sort of making sure that we're spending correctly and doing a lot more ROI calculations and reporting. So right now I've had my ops hat on for like 2 quarters, which isn't my favorite hat to wear. I'd much rather be like helping out and pitching in with product marketing and writing and telling the story of Varonis. So I think there's like seasonality to it, depending on where you have strong leaders in your team. I happen to have really good leaders on the event side, really good leaders on like product marketing. And so I can take a step back from those areas, knowing that I have a really good team in place that can carry a lot of the weight and set the strategy. And, we just went through a big planning season, dating back to like end of September. We got a pretty early start of thinking about 2023 and where we're going to place our bets and how we're going to operate. And so, I would say the past 2 quarters, I've been spending a lot on team infrastructure, budgeting, operations, making sure that we're like really have the machinery in place to have fewer errors and set ourselves up to have a good solid plan that we can articulate and accurately measure going into this year.
Gotcha. And if you were like looking back and you could talk to yourself as you're getting started at Varonis, about to go on this path, like, what would be the advice you'd give to yourself or things you would do differently?
Wow. That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think, I think early on, I think it's important to identify where your strengths are. A lot of times, like, so CMOs typically come up through one of the following paths, like product marketing, demand gen, communications, or sales, right? And I know a lot of CMOs these days manage SDR teams. So you got to figure out like where your strengths are, and not spread yourself too thin and hire for your weaknesses. So that would probably be my biggest piece of advice to my former self, is like recognize where it's easier to hire somebody who's really good at something that you're not good at and put them in a position, give them autonomy and let it continue to be your weakness so you could focus on your strengths. That's kind of where I wish I had done things differently.
That's super interesting. And with your weaknesses, is it about like understanding a base level so you can either manage that person or be aware if they're doing a good or bad job? Because one thing I struggle with, like, where I either have a weakness or I don't have good experience to hire for that role, it's hard to know if they're good or not. And it's like, do you get help from others who you do know are good to vet that, because that's something that I've struggled with certain roles.
Yeah, I think having that baseline understanding really helps, and to me, like I'm just curious about everything. Like I'm naturally curious person. So like I'm not super strong on the event side. I have strong leaders on the event side, but ever since I took over as CMO and I had to start caring about events because, I oversee all of our marketing programs. Like I've asked a million, I've probably annoyed the hell out of our marketing leaders on the event side in EMEA and in North America, and just asking a ton of questions. Why do we pick this event? Or like, how about, what if we do like, a happy hour after this event? Would it be good? Like, can we invite people? Do we set up a landing page? Like, so I'm always asking questions and learning about the areas that I didn't grow up with. I didn't grow up with events. I didn't grow up on the ops side. I'm way more of a product marketer / demand gen person.
Yeah.
And so I think it does help to learn and have a baseline understanding. And, as you grow older and like do a lot more interviews and work with a lot more people, different archetypes, you kind of can understand when someone knows their stuff. Like just even if you don't know it, it's going back to that question that I brought up earlier, which is like, you ask somebody like, what are you going to do this quarter? You have the people that are like, oh, I'm glad you asked. Let me show you my model, my PowerPoint deck, plan A, B, and C. We could do either of these. Let me talk you through what's good about A and what's good about C. Those people, you're going to be like, okay, you clearly are obsessed with this stuff, know what you're doing, have been in this movie before. And then you have the people that are like, oh, you know what? Glad you asked. Like, I just started thinking about this. I think we'll do a little bit of what we did last year. Can I get back to you? Like that person, you cannot trust them. You cannot, So I think without even knowing their domain, just seeing how they respond to a simple question like that will be very, very telling as to whether you need to kind of get either someone new in that role or you need to kind of like inspect the hell out of what they're doing.
Wow. That's really good advice. And those are such good early signals or flags to know, okay, you are cut out for this role or not cut out for this role, not the leadership role, but you could be the creative that we go into when we need the ideas. That's super interesting. Selfish, I'm just like taking mental notes on what we need to be doing at our company.
Because like you can have somebody who is like very bad at strategy, who doesn't want to make the plan. But if you say, hey, Steve, we need to make an explainer video about this product, and here's some bullet points about what the product does, and they're a great video person, like they can be tremendously valuable to your team, but they're not, they're not going to make the plan. They're just very good executing on an existing plan. You need those people too, for sure. To help get the job done.
Yeah. So I don't know if I have a question here, but I'm going to go down this path and see where it goes. So you and I are like going down very different paths, right? And I talk about this with my buddy who worked at Airbnb and was a part of that ride and was able to go public and had an amazing exit. And I think maybe some of the people listening might be conflicted. You have this idea of like these entrepreneurs that want to bootstrap and do their own thing. Kind of what I've gone down with Growth Head. Like, got this nice little company. We're doing a little startup studio and launching businesses. And it's like, oh, we get to own the things. We're funding it ourselves and going down this path. But then you have this path you go down where it's like, wow, I found this rocket ship and I'm going to jump on it. And you clearly, because you see people that maybe jumped on the rocket ship of WeWork where it did not work out, but like your rocket ship has worked out very well and you've been able to grow with it. And it's, approaching this path of $1 billion. Like, I don't think you're gonna be like, oh, I made the right decision, Jim. I'm now going to go spin off and go do my own thing. But was there ever like a fork in the road where you had to think through that? Because you've also like built things yourself and started your own companies as side projects. Like, how should people like navigate what's right for them? And not that the door is ever shut to go do one or the other, but like, was that ever like a thought that you had when like evaluating those options?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to try things when you're young. I was lucky enough to work for a smaller software company that was bootstrapped. 30 people in the entire company, slow paced, very much like lifestyle oriented, but we still made good money because we had profit sharing and it was run in the right way. So like joining a bootstrap company or bootstrapping your own company, I think you have to ask yourself, like, what are you okay with as your final like destination? Like, I really admire what you do, what Nathan Barry does. Like, there's something to be said for doing it your way and on your terms, and not having so much pressure to grow, X% year over year and higher, and just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I think you see it with some of like the big tech companies like Meta and, Apple and Amazon. It's just like, when does it end? Right. Like when,
yeah.
like, and a lot of the reckoning is happening this year with like, okay, maybe we don't need like 25,000 people in this, in this division. Right. Like at some point it becomes this like beast. And when you grow on your own terms and when you're bootstrapped, you can kind of, I think, have your cake and eat it too. I think we talked about this during my last conversation with you. We were doing predictions, and I was sort of predicting this new model where smart founders would create like highly profitable businesses and grow slowly, but then like give their employees like big chunks of profit. And so the outcome could be the same as jumping on a rocket ship that goes public. Like financially, you could actually engineer it such that like, your first few employees, your head of marketing or your head of sales or your CTO can have really lucrative financial outcomes in a bootstrapped way. So I think typically it doesn't work that way. So most times when you're signing up to be, an engineer at a bootstrap company, that is stated that they do not want to raise funding. They're not going to grow at all costs. You're kind of signing up for a certain salary at a fixed rate of growth and no really big outcome in sight.
Yeah.
But I would love it if there was like a middle model where you can get an outsized personal financial outcome while still doing the slow, steady growth and not have to worry about like sort of the exponential growth that a VC-backed company would require.
Yeah, no, and I forgot you did make that prediction because it's something we're trying to like dance around, trying to figure out what the kind of startup studio model to give people upside. But yeah, there has to be some in between, right? It's just a matter of like what structure does that take. But no, man, that's super cool.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'm allergic to is being a passenger in the car. So
yes.
Whether it's at a bootstrap company, or a high growth company or VC backed company, like I couldn't join Microsoft and be like a passenger where it's like I have my specific role, but I can't steer at all in any which way. So I think that's another important. And some people like to blend in. Some people like to be the passenger in the car. They don't want to have to think about paying attention to the navigation system or deciding like whether we stop off in Pittsburgh on our way to Boston, right? Like they don't want to make any of the decisions, and that's fine too. Like if that's your personality type, if that suits like where you want to go in life, there is really no wrong answer. But for me, as long as I'm given autonomy and the ability to drive a little bit, whether that's at like a big behemoth company, a mid-sized company like Varonis, or at a startup, I feel like I could be happy in either one of those roles. So
yeah, I think that's a good distinction. Like being able to leave your footprint and be able to like, have autonomy and have the impact that you want to have. I think, that's very cool. So in closing, I usually ask a question, but I'm going to shift it because I've asked it to you before, where I'm going to selfishly get some parenting advice from you because we both have, wait, do you have 3 kids now? You have 3 kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3. I knew that. I have 2. How old's your oldest? Are you upper middle school?
Yeah, I have an 11-year-old who's in 6th grade.
Oh man. So, and I believe you have a child that has been on SNL. So you're have a child star on your hands. I have 2 girls, 3 and 5. How's it going? How are the middle school years or the older elementary years treating you?
I'm blessed. Like I have the typical like oldest daughter, the 11-year-old. She's very responsible. Awesome. She's got like that Catholic guilt. She goes to Catholic school, and like if she stepped on someone's foot on the way to gym class, she would come home and be like, "Dad, I have to confess I stepped on someone's foot." It's like I don't have to worry about anything, at least not right now. This may change over time, but I am blessed. She's such a responsible, organized kid. She, loves doing her homework. She's obsessed with like climate science, and she's just like
Oh
a
my
very
gosh.
um
Yeah.
prototypical geek, like she's wonderful. My youngest, my 5-year-old daughter, is complete the opposite. She's the wild child, so who knows
Yeah.
what I'm in for there. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fun to see different personalities sprout up from the same environment. It's like we're not doing
Right?
anything different, yet we have 3 completely different children.
Man, we have that. We have the same thing. Our oldest daughter, she's 5. She's like a nice little leader. She follows the rules. If she does something bad, she'll come back 7 seconds later crying, apologizing, and you're like, it's okay. Whereas our 3-year-old, literally, we're putting her to bed the other night. She stood up, took off her clothes on the bed, and looked at us and says, I do what I want. And we're just like, who are you? Like, where did you come from? But yeah, we're at the for the 5-year-old, we're definitely at the honesty phase. Like my wife and I were going to a Roaring 20s holiday party. She has like this flapper dress on, and she's like, "Oh, you look like a princess. You look pretty." And then she looked at me. I had this newsy hat on, and my daughter goes, "What's on your head?" I was like, "Oh, it's a newsy hat." And then she paused and she goes, you should never wear that again. And then just walked out of the room. I was like, all right, yep, that's the truth. She's not just trying to be mean, but yeah, it's pretty entertaining. But awesome stuff, man. Well, I know I'll be maybe when you guys hit 1 billion is when we'll bring you back on. But Rob, it's always so fun to talk to you, man. I just I'm always learning from you, and it's cool to catch up and see what you're doing with Varonis, man. But really appreciate the time. I know you're super busy, so thank you.
Yeah, anytime.